part. I know many of you. Some of you are new faces, which I always love. My name is Adam Johnson. I'm Acting Director of Education and Interpretive Programs here at the museum. I'm thrilled you're here tonight for the first behind-the-scene program of our third season. So this is the third year we've presented a series of programs which really expose wonderful conservation projects that would otherwise be really unknown to the general public. Tonight we have the great opportunity to hear from Scott, who is our senior curator of painting, our senior conservator of paintings. And Scott Heffley is going to talk tonight about Albert Bloch, who was an artist who worked in Munich as part of De Writers, and eventually wound up in Florence, Kansas, not too far away. Scott is going to tell you a little bit more about that. Scott has given some of these behind-the-scenes programs in the past. He always has wonderful surprises in store for you. I will let him also talk to you a little bit about how tonight's event goes. And just one kind of note that I want to let you know about for the future, we present this series on a monthly basis. Tonight is the third Thursday of October. Next month in November, we're starting a brand new series called Third Thursday, appropriately enough. If you've ever attended one of the museum's big family festivals, things like Chinese New Year, things like the Day of the Dead festival that's coming up, the idea of Third Thursday is it's going to be like one of those big festivals for adults. There's going to be live music, there's going to be a cash bar, there's going to be hands-on art activities, and programs like Behind the Scenes will become folded in as one of the great variety of offerings you can participate in on those evenings. So something to keep in mind, the third Thursday of every month there's going to be great free activities. Behind the Scenes, this program series will continue on. So with that plug set up, I will turn it over to Scott.
Well, thank you all for coming, because I went home just a little bit ago. It's gorgeous outside. I think this room would have been full, except that it's so beautiful, and I barely came back, but I'm going to be in real trouble if I did. So. But thank you for coming to me. Albert Bloch is an artist that I'm now surrounded by, and some of you may know about him, some may know well about him, some a little bit, and some nothing. I've been associated with Albert Bloch for the 30 years that I've been here at Nelson, and he's a very special artist to me, and I want to share some of my insight and knowledge and some of the stories that I have about the artist. But I really kind of want to start. We're in the Gallery of American Art that deals with the early 19th, the early 20th century. So the paintings in this gallery are from around 1900 to 1920s, mostly from the teens and O's. So when you look around, and I really do invite you to sort of look at the blocks and sort of do a little pivot around, looking at the other paintings, there's really, you'll notice, quite a difference between these three paintings and the rest of the room. Even though they're from the same period, they're all American works of art. I think one comparison, especially that's interesting, is to look at this Albert Bloch from 1913 and really do turn around and look at the Thomas Hart Benton portrait of his sister, also dated 1913. And there's a huge difference. The other paintings in America at this time were dealing with working from their past, and their past working towards the future. Whereas Bloch, who was born in St. Louis and grew up as a young man in St. Louis, went to Munich, Germany, and worked from 1909 to 1921. And in 1913, he was working with the first law writer group. So he was already imbued in the modernist movement, which had not hit America yet. So Benton became quite a modernist, a wonderful modernist, and in the other galleries you see his abstractions and interpretations and so on. He hadn't gotten there yet, even though at this point he was working in New York City. Bloch was a little older than Benton. Bloch was 31 when he painted this, and Benton was 24, I believe, when he painted his sister. But just as a little background on the artist Albert Bloch, he was born in St. Louis in 1882 and was just a very smart guy and a very good draftsman. And he, as a young man, worked for a periodical, an intellectual periodical, doing caricatures, political caricatures and caricatures of literary people. These were not cartoons, but they were very loud, wonderful drawings. And he was so bright that the owner of that periodical called The Beer in St. Louis felt that this artist needed to learn more and have more opportunities than he would have had in St. Louis. So he sent Albert Bloch to Munich, well actually to Germany, to study art, and he thought that he would, and he funded him, and he had a family, a wife, and at that point I think one child. So William Reedy funded Albert Bloch to go to Munich, and he thought he'd enroll in the academy. And Munich actually was sort of the learning place for a lot of Americans in the late 19th century, and so it seemed like a reasonable place to go. Well, Albert Bloch didn't want to have anything to do with the academy, he just wanted to learn from other artists, work with other artists, and so on. So he worked on his own, and had not started painting until 1909. His early paintings, which I've seen, like any artist, are just learning paintings, and so they weren't real good. And it's always fun to see artists when they don't do as well as some other times, just because they're human and you see that. But he was such a quick learner that his first work with paint on canvas was 09, and this painting he painted in 1911. And in the fall of 1911, some of you who know your art history know that Kandinsky and Franz Marc and other German expressionists were living in Munich at that time. And Kandinsky and Marc visited Bloch's studio in the fall, and they were very impressed with what they saw. And they were breaking away from the group that they worked with, group of artists in Munich at that time, and then invited Bloch to exhibit with them in the first Blue Rider exhibit, which was in Munich, December of 1911. And actually, Bloch exhibited 6 paintings in that show. And that show had only 43 paintings in it. And those of you who know a little about art history, that is one of the turning point exhibits in modern art. It really set the stage for the launching of modern art as we know it. And so Albert Bloch, a young man, a young American working in Munich, exhibited this painting in that show. And it's kind of fun. This is his second version of the painting. Another version that looks very similar to it is just number 1, 3 parallels, number 1. And he gave that to Franz Marc. And the artists back then, as they do today, exchange art. So he gave that to Franz Marc, and it's in the Franz Marc Museum. And Franz Marc gave Albert Bloch works as well. In painting this, and this is a little bit where the conservation comes in, he painted over another painting. A young guy, not a lot of money. And when, after the talk, I want you to come on up and really look at this closely, because you'll see lots of brush strokes that have nothing to do with the form of the figures. There are a lot of horizontal brush strokes, and so we know that Albert Bloch painted another painting underneath this, and in fact at the edges you can see different colors peeking out around the edge. And so he didn't like the painting that he did below that, painted this on top, and exhibited it with 5 others in the first Blue Rider exhibit. Now those of you that know a little bit about the growth of modern painting realize that the first Blue Rider exhibit was very pivotal. That was 1911, and then in 1912 it traveled to other places in Germany. In 1912 in Cologne, there was the Sonderbond exhibit, which was a real effort to collect European modern paintings into one exhibit in Cologne, and they had 100 Van Gogh paintings in that show, for instance. They're realizing that Van Gogh and Cézanne and so on are very important modern figures. So that exhibit, which was also an important turning point exhibit in Cologne, had 650 paintings in it. Then you go 1 year further to the Armory show in New York City, which that people have heard about. Americans went to Europe and talked to Picasso and other modernist artists and said, we want to do a show in New York about modernism, and who do you recommend that we have in it? So there were recommendations, there were suggestions of certain paintings. American artists were invited to show in this exhibit. It was a pivotal exhibit for America, and there were around 1,300 works of art in that exhibit. But if you sort of wheel back to the first Blue Rider exhibit with 43 paintings and Albert Bloch having 6 of them, it just shows how he was at the right place at the right time with the right capabilities. And just to sort of talk through his career a little bit, he's there in Munich, exhibiting with the first Blue Rider. Then 1912, 1913, he does this painting. And there's really a difference between this and then we moved to 1913 where he did this. This is all within a few years period. We see the artist go from somewhat tentative and even painting over other canvases to 1913. He's using a broad brush. He's just knows what he's doing. He's just putting that paint on. When you come up and look at it after the talk, you'll see that this green paint shows the ground color through. He's just sort of scrubbed this on, letting the ground color show through. And, it gives a real dynamic surface to the painting. In this case, there's not much impasto. Here, there's more impasto. He's working on larger canvases, much more confident, and all of that within a year. I mean, Lord. He starts he just starts painting in 1909. So he lives in Germany from that point with his family. And then the war begins, First World War begins. He's American. America doesn't enter the war until 1917, so things are okay. The war never entered actually German territories. There were no battles there. Economics were bad. People are going to buy food before they're buying paintings. But he was still receiving some money from William Reedy, although I might be wrong on that. We have a scholar here who could correct me on that. But he's struggling with his family, but still doing okay. Then America enters the war, and in Germany at that time, they didn't put him in concentration camps or things like that. He just had to register as an enemy alien. And every week, Anna Bloch, his widow, told me these stories. Every week he'd just have to go to an office and say, I'm here, you're not doing me any trouble, everything was fine, and he'd go back home with his family and work on his art and try to sell it and so on. And he was also of Jewish descent, so the thing it was World War I and not World War II in this case. So he survived okay in Germany through the war with his family, with 2 kids at this point. Then the war ended, and Germany just really fell apart. And at that point, he just had to get his family out. So I'm not sure of the exact date, but maybe it was 1919 or so. He brought his family out. He went back to Germany one more time, collected his effects, finished what he was doing there, and left Germany for the last time. Came back to America. When he arrived in America, he first went to Chicago and taught at the Art Institute in Chicago for a year. And during that time, there was a job opening at Lawrence, Kansas, at KU. And so he applied for the painting and drawing department at KU, and in Anna's archives, we have the application that he wrote to KU, and he just said, "Oh, you're not going to pick me," but then he talked about what he did and what he knew and so on, and "You're not going to pick me," and he said, he was just not the right kind of application for an important job. But they could see through all of that, and they did indeed hire him. So he came to Lawrence in 1922 as the head of the art department there, and moved in at 1015 Alabama, 1922, and lived there until his death in 1961. And his widow, his second wife, Anna, lived there until she passed away this year. So the Bloch family has lived in Camden at this one house from 22 until just this year, which is a pretty amazing bit of history. But Bloch, when he came back to America, and after we finish in here, we're going to go around the corner and look at some later period blocks, the paintings that he did in Lawrence. And his style did change quite a bit. We'll have a look at that. But anytime I'm giving these little talks, you're always welcome to interrupt with questions or any comments or anything like that. It's just really about talking about art, as far as I'm concerned. Nothing special from my point of view. Yeah.
Okay, all right. The writer, why did they pick that name? What was the significance of that name for their group? The German expression. Was it a book? Was it a...
Well, there is an answer to that, and I'm not sure of it. And Kandinsky probably had an involvement with that. They had a Blue Rider Almanac, and there really is an answer to that that I'm not sure of.
If I have the question, I'll find it.
Then we'll all go to the internet as soon as we get out of this. We'll find it very quickly. Yeah.
The lamentation, is that the original frame?
Well, that's a good question. It actually, he did not frame it. Bloch, at this point, Bloch is in Germany working with Kandinsky and so on. And there's an important collector in Chicago, Jerome Eddy, who was enamored with Kandinsky's paintings. And he was not, extremely rich. He was a lawyer, so he did well. But he just loved art. And so he talked to Kandinsky, bought a number of Kandinskys, and put them in his house in Chicago. This is 1912, 1913, 1914. And Kandinsky said, "Oh, you really should buy Bloch." And so he looked at Bloch's, and he bought them, and he bought this painting, and he did frame it. Jerome Eddy did frame this with this frame. The reason I know that is because some of his collection, after he passed away, was given to the Art Institute in Chicago. His collection of modernist works, including a wonderful Albert Bloch painting that they have on view all the time. And I saw that same frame profile on, not the Albert Bloch, but other paintings that were once owned by Jerome Eddy, and Arthur Jerome Eddy. And this frame didn't have this color originally, and I don't know what the color was originally, but the owners that donated it to the Nelson had the finish changed. I guess it was flaking quite a bit, and they took it to someone to refresh it, and they repainted the frame. But that kind of history is very interesting. Now, the Green Domino, that's a frame that probably went on in the 50s. And Anna tells the story that and Summer Night, another wonderful painting from 1913, were found at a thrift store in Arizona or New Mexico. I don't know. I wish I had gone to that thrift store. And then somehow I got to a good collector, and a good collector put this frame on it. And he also put the same frame on Summer Night, which we have on view here at Nelson for a while. Painting, they just sort of go here and there, and then, understand they're important, and they only land in a museum. Now, we're very lucky here at Nelson. We have 5 Albert Bloch paintings, and we'll be able to see all 5 tonight. I've got one from storage to show you, and several watercolors and drawings. And we're lucky in the fact that they've all been donations to us. In 1997, the Nelson, in collaboration with the Lembach House, which is the German Expressionist Museum in Munich, did a show that traveled to Munich as well as to Delaware and here at the Nelson. It was a monographic show. There's a wonderful catalog that we put together for that, and it's actually on sale in the bookstore still. And in fact, John put a nice display of it, so if you have it tells the history of drawings and photographs and good photos of the paintings that were in the show and other pieces as well. So it really is a nice resource. And in gratitude, Anna Bloch donated this painting and one we'll see in a little bit, later American work, to the Nelson. And also because of that show, these paintings were in the show, and the owners of this painting that lived in Chicago felt that the painting should go to an important home, and so they donated this painting to us in 1998, the year after the show. And this painting was in the show by a good collector in Atlanta, and he worked with our curator and said, when I pass away, I'm going to leave this painting to you. And he did, and it came to us just a couple of years ago, 2010. And if you don't know, whenever, really just about any museum, you can find the accession number. And usually the accession number will have the date when it was acquired somewhere in that number. And I love to do that. When you go to the National Gallery in London, you look at an accession number and you see 1765, something like that. But here at the Nelson, it may be camouflage, but it's often pretty easy to pick out. So, when you go to other museums, you can do that. Yeah.
Would you say that out of museums worldwide, do we have a larger number? Are there some in Florence, considering how long he was down there at the Spencer or something? Or?
Right. The Spencer has a good collection of Albert Bloch works. And other museums where you can find them, Chicago Art Institute, Cleveland Museum, the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco, the LA County Museum, the Birmingham Museum, Whitney Museum, Museum of Modern Art. Now, at the Whitney Museum of Modern Art, I haven't seen them on view. They maybe put them up, but not have them up. But yeah, they're around, and it's kind of interesting. He's an artist that is sort of somewhat fallen off of the radar screen, and that is changing. And it's interesting, when you realize that he had 6 paintings in the first Blue Rider exhibit. This is an important artist. But then he moved to Lawrence, Kansas, taught at the artist the school there, and he didn't want to have anything to do with the art market. He just sort of stayed away from it. He exhibited only when invited. He didn't have a gallery in New York. He didn't, want to go through that trouble. He didn't want that pressure. He had a good enough living as a professor. He could paint and painted continually through his entire career, and just said, hey, I'll just do what I want, and I don't have to worry about it. So that kind of helped push him off of the radar screen. I think that actually is changing, because a number of those museums I just listed acquired their Albert Blochs within the last 7 to 10 years. Yeah.
Where did his imagery sort of come from on the German paintings? Was he influenced by these kind of hooded figures? Where did that design vocabulary come from?
Well, the Perraults, the 3 Perraults, sort of deals with that Italian literature, but he sort of moves beyond that. Bloch was not only a painter, he was a literary scholar and wrote poetry and read poetry. So that's a good question because we continue to ask that about the hooded figures. And he did that continually through his career, you know, even more so in his American period over in Lawrence. And these are mourning figures. You know, they're not happy. And you know, the shrouded figures often will sort of carry that melancholy. Now the Green Domino, on the other hand, that's like a masquerade kind of thing. And you can just imagine being in Germany at a big party, and that's what's going on. And that really is a great painting to have in the collection at this point. Now, as we sort of look at the history of this, so Albert comes back, gets a job at KU, you know, settles into a nice house close to campus, is teaching, and he brought back most of his paintings from Germany, kind of all rolled up. You know, he doesn't have any money, he's moving from Europe to America, and he brought some paintings on their stretchers. They would have had to have been boxed up somehow. But many of them kind of rolled them all together into one big roll. Not so good for paintings. And sometime in the 70s, the director of the Tulsa, Oklahoma, Phil Brook, was interested in Bloch and met with Anna Bloch. Albert Bloch died in 1961. And these paintings were rolled up and stuffed in the attic. Well, the attic, the third floor, was his studio. He had like a crawl space where he kind of stuffed this roll of paintings. Didn't, really care about them. But he understood that there was a great importance here, and he came and he unrolled them carefully and just sort of let them lay flat. Didn't try to impose anything on them or restore them, which was good, but he just knew they shouldn't be rolled and they should have an opportunity to relax. And so that happened in the 70s. Then, in the 80s, early 80s, the Guggenheim Museum was planning a one-man show of Albert Bloch's German period. So they talked to the widow Anna Bloch, and all of that was going to happen. The curator was involved. It was pretty exciting. So in 1984, April of 1984, Anna Bloch and two curators from the Spencer Museum brought over 7 or 8 Albert Bloch paintings that had been rolled up to me in the conservation department here at the Nelson. Now I just started in January of 1984, so I'm like here for 3.5 months, and I'm meeting Anna Bloch and I'm seeing these stretcher cases. And that included this painting, 3 Perrots. And at that point, Forrest Bailey, the chief conservator at that point, was able to do some private work, and I was doing some private work with him. And so I met Anna Bloch, I met these 2 scholars, and there were 7 Albert Blochs for me to work on for the Guggenheim exhibit. And so I worked on those in the next couple of years and restored them. And it turned out then the curator that was planning the show at the Guggenheim left, and so somehow that show fizzled and never happened. But it wasn't my opportunity to meet Anna Bloch and to get involved in the Albert Bloch saga. And some of these paintings were in pretty bad condition. They were thickly painted. There's a self-portrait, as I remember, from that early German period that had all these very strong cupped cracks, horizontal cupped cracks. And, I used different conservation techniques, moisture and heat and weights and time, and really was able to relax those cracks and then line the painting to another stable support. And that was back in the mid-80s, and today the painting's still in great shape. They don't even know that it was cracked before. So in the case of Albert Bloch and his paintings, it's all gone the right way. Anna didn't take these to a frame shop or store. As someone working in conservation, really most of when we're restoring older paintings, most of the work we have to do is undoing other restorers' bad work. I would say 65% of my effort, and I'm kind of reaching back to old master paintings and so on. 65% or so of my effort is undoing bad work by other people, and only 35% or so is just dealing with the ravages of time. So, luckily, Anna did not take any of these to hack restorers, and I was able to address them properly here at the Nelson. Then, I became very friendly with Anna and cleaned other paintings for her and other things with her, and realized that we needed to do a big show on Bloch. So our curator of American art then, Henry Adams, was interested in Bloch, and I could continually suggest, how nice it would be if we did some sort of special show, and, what do you think? And you thought, oh, that's great, and then it wouldn't go anywhere. And you can't hound someone. When you want them to do something, you need to back off and wait, and when you find an opportunity, get in there and say something. And then Frank Barron at KU had a symposium on Bloch. I don't remember the exact date, it was probably 95 or something like that. And Henry and I went to it, and Frank had a number of speakers on Albert Bloch. And all of my groundwork with Henry finally paid off. He got a little more excited, and he then reached out to the Lembach House in Munich, and they were interested because they had done, he's a Blue Rider artist, although American, and they had worked with shows on all the other Blue Rider artists, and so we teamed up and ended up with the 1997 exhibit, which was a retrospective, not only the early German period pieces, but the American pieces as well. So then I stayed with it, and very good friends with Anna, continuing to help in whatever way I could. And she owned, 100 paintings by her husband and hundreds of drawings. And she was elderly, and it was collectively decided that the smart thing to do was form the Albert Bloch Foundation, because these pieces needed to go somewhere and needed to have a future. And so we worked with a lawyer in Lawrence who did this pro bono, because it was a lot of work. We formed a proper nonprofit foundation, and I'm the president of that foundation. So, 30 years of Albert Bloch, keeps on rolling. It'll be another, well, maybe not 30, 25. And we're in the process of donating the Albert Bloch archives to the Smithsonian Archives of American Art, which is something we've been planning for some time, and we're doing that as we speak. So this is all very exciting, and this is Kansas City. Kansas City, Lawrence. We have, here in Missouri, we have, a lot of good artists, but you can think of three really quickly. You can think of Bingham, you can think of Benton, and you can think of Albert Bloch. They're all B's. Maybe we'll get to the C's one day. But we're very proud here at the Nelson to have this strong showing of Albert Bloch's work, and the Spencer had a show that just closed a couple of months ago on his dry points and drawings, and they put up some of the paintings that they own as well. There's a small catalog associated with that. But let's, if you want to take your chairs or not, go and look at some of the American period blocks. Well, I brought a block that we don't have on view at this time, and thought it'd be nice for you to see them all. So why not? This is 1926, and so as you remember, Bloch arrives in Lawrence. He's teaching art history. He's teaching painting. He's teaching drawing, and so in the 20s, he really wasn't doing a lot of painting. but he did paint. He just couldn't stop painting. And this is a rare painting from 1926. And you can, it's actually very interesting in that it's a bridge painting for the artist. You know, he was very colorful, bold colors in the other room, and he's got that going here as well. But he's moving into his American period through this painting also. When you have a chance to come up more closely, he's done little fine, feathery trees, little secret plants that are just barely showing through. He's using white, starting to use white as a color in different places. And he has an uncanny way of creating the glow of light. I mean, there's no lights behind here shining through. You know, the dove and the figures, he worked with paint in such a way that they literally look like they're glowing. Masterful at that. In this mid-20s period, there are a few paintings where he just captured that wonderful quality. This was a gift to us by a doctor in Topeka whose family was close to Bloch and other people associated with Bloch, and wanted Nelson to have this. And it's been on view before, but currently not on view. This painting, Winter in the Dead Wood, was painted originally in 1934. And we have in the archives a photograph of the painting at that time. Then in 1938, he changed it. And artists usually change things for the better. Originally, the painting had an owl sitting on this stump, and there was a skull sort of half buried in the snow. And he looked at it, and I've looked at the photo of the painting at that time, and it was just too overt, you know. Remember, he lived through World War I in Germany, and he just hated war more than anything. And this is 1934, so he sees what's happening in Germany again. He's just, this bleakness relates to what he's worried about for the future. And he's already predicting, you know, skulls in the ground, and it's 1934. But as an artist, he, after 4 years, or maybe during that 4 years, looked at it and said, well, that's too much. And so he painted the skull out and the owl out, and it improved it remarkably. You know, it's subtle, more subtle. You know, the strength of the bleakness doesn't need any skulls, you know, for it to work. It's there. But here, he's sort of mid-American period, and he's using white a lot and using white lines, you know, as if, you know, it's a color. And he's creating this tapestry of linearity and overlapping forms to, you know, really harmonize. But in the American period, moving from here to here, he's reduced his palette quite a bit. And he did that for many of his paintings in the American period. He just sort of kept a very simple palette, and that was one of his philosophies. And he was an excellent technician. And again, you know, all these paintings we look at, I want you to come and look at closely, separately, because if you look right here and right here, you'll see that the paint strokes don't line up with the rest of the painting. It kind of just is different, and it's especially easy to see there. And he didn't change any of the rest of the painting because we have a photograph of it and we can compare. But he, you know, that's where the conservator has the experience. We're looking at the details of the surface, and you know, even if I hadn't known of the changes, I probably would have been looking at this painting and said, well, what's going on here? And maybe even wondered if someone had restored it and overpainted something there. But we know from a documentation point of view that that's not the case. And this was in the exhibit that Nelson put together with the Lembach House and traveled in that show. And Anna Bloch gave that to the Nelson in generosity after being so pleased with how the show and the catalog came about. Now we have over here Uger Sanzane, who some of you may know, and he worked in Lawrenceburg, Kansas at the same time. In fact, this painting is dated 1938, I believe, and this is 34-38. And Bloch knew Sanzane. I don't know how well they knew each other. And at one point, as artists will do, Sanzane suggested that they trade paintings. He thought that would be a good idea. Well, Bloch really didn't want one. And he said no. He said, yeah, I don't think so. I don't, you know, they're nice, but and this is a nice thing to look at here. And it's a beautiful painting. And in fact, this painting was done for Nelson. A patron in town bought a painting from Sanzane in probably a year or so before that. And she liked it so much, and I've seen it, it really is wonderful, that she commissioned Sanzane to do a larger version of it, and she was going to give it to the Nelson. So all along he knew it was coming to the Nelson when he painted it. And it came straight to the Nelson. He paints with very high, sharp impasto, and oftentimes if these paintings are out in the public and some restorer cleans them, they do a lot of damage knocking off that sharp impasto. But this, having stayed at the Nelson its entire life, when my colleague Mary Schaefer cleaned it with great effort, I might add, it was wonderful because it's in such pristine shape. And it's beautiful. You know, it's really surface and texture and color. But Bloch was an intellectual. I mean, he was a scholar, he was a poet. In fact, he was, Karl Kraus is a critic, literary critic in Germany at the same time as when Bloch was there and after. You know, he wrote these very complex intellectual things and poetry as well. And Bloch was enamored with this guy and his writings. And so he corresponded with him, and he then was the only authorized person that could translate Karl Kraus's poetry from German into English. And imagine how hard that would be. And Kraus felt he would do it right, so he authorized him to do it, and he even published Kraus's works in English. But here's this guy, you know, whose brain is going 1,000,000 miles an hour into all these interesting and often dark areas, and then Sanzane is just pretty and nice. I don't know, that's not being very complimentary, and I don't mean it to be that way, but I guess Bloch just didn't want to have one. Yes?
Yeah, I was curious, since you said that you like to write and also do poetry, have you ever been able to look at some of the time periods of certain poems or writings and to see if they influenced what the context of his painting was at that time? For example, you know, a lot of his paintings you can see kind of a spiritual or fantasy theme, and then it looks like he moved more into like a landscape. And I was just kind of curious if there's ever been any, you know, review of some of the poems or the writings that he had, and then at the same time that he was producing pictures to see if there was much relationship with what may have been going on in his life, or when he got into the second marriage, or, you know, that new love, if that kind of was reflected in some of the paintings that he was doing at that time.
Well, that's a good question, and I don't think it's been thoroughly studied. Now, Jeff Weinberg in Lawrence at KU has been interested in Bloch's poetry, and so he's been doing some research and work with that. But that's one of the beauties of donating all of the archives to the National Archives of American Art. All of those papers will be available for someone to take that up and look for comparisons between the poetry that he might have been doing at that time and some of the paintings. But he never did simple landscapes. You know, they're always complex, and they're always, you know, you wonder what's going on in there. They're not just pictures of trees and maybe people. Now, you know, he did sort of move into I call it kind of a dark area, but he's thoughtful, but had sort of a darkness and a deepness to some of his thoughts and some of his paintings. I don't think that has to do with living in Kansas, but
What is his style though after he obviously continued painting after World War II, so how did his style?
Well, actually, he just could read what was going to happen, and another war was on its way, and he was just devastated by that. And so his paintings, knowing what war was like, just foretold a darkness. Actually, the Jewish Museum bought a painting from Anna because they wanted to have and it relates to the war, and Hitler's depicted in a comical way, not a funny way, but a negatively comical way. A pretty wonderful painting. So the war affected him, and then sort of during it, and he did paint. His last painting was 1959, and he died in 61. And he was so active in Germany with the. I mean, Franz Marc was actually a very close personal friend. He and Maria Marc. And Franz Marc would write postcards to Albert Bloch, those wonderful postcards with the painting watercolors on them. And Marc was killed in World War I and buried at the battlefield burial. And Bloch was the individual that was instrumental in having the body brought from the battlefield to the home plot. He was like that close a friend to the Marcs. And there's correspondence between Maria Marc and Albert Bloch because they were friends, for years into the 30s and beyond that. In 1920, they published some works about Franz Marc, and Maria Marc gave the volumes to Albert Bloch with an inscription. So, he was tied in with all of those people. So, the richness of all of that, and coming to Kansas and having a wonderful life there, but just sort of blocking out the effort to sell things. Yeah.
How did Bloch die?
He was old, in his 70s, and he had had a heart attack actually in 49, but that didn't cause him to die. And I don't know if he had another heart attack at that point or was sick and then just sort of died, but he was in his 70s in 61.
Was he still teaching at that point?
No, he stopped teaching not in 49, not long after the heart attack, because there's just so much effort involved in teaching. I guess he felt he shouldn't do that. So,
what did his paintings look like in the 50s, post-war? Did they continue to have that kind of just rehashing of the dark?
No, not rehashing, and that's why, if you're on your way out, just go into the bookstore and have a peek at the catalog, because it shows paintings all the way through, good color photos. He liked to work with clowns, but there are always, these strange things that come out of clowns. They're not funny, and they're not scary, but they're just somewhere else. And landscapes with sort of strange twists to them. He would do figures in the landscape, and what Travis was saying, to sort of look at the poetry from those periods and compare it to the paintings, I think would be a great PhD thesis. It's all sitting there ready to go in a few months. Yeah.
So, there's the Blue Riders. How did that title come about? What does that mean?
Well, that was asked, and I'm sure that Kandinsky.
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
You didn't hear? Sure. There is an answer to that, and I'm not 100% sure, but right now, but I know Kandinsky was involved with it, the naming of it, and he had a Blue Rider almanac and did an image of a rider on a horse that was painted blue. Now, I'm sure there's more to it than that, but that's just what I could pull up right now. I mean, it has, sometimes these names come from nowhere, and then, and then they stick.
A good band name.
Yeah, good, that worked.
It sounds good.
Yeah, I can remember that. Any other questions?
So was it just the German paintings that were rolled up, and then the subsequent, once he got into the United States, those would be made on framed and everything like that?
Well, yeah, they were rolled up. And
But no, once again, the question was, is it only the German ones that were rolled up? He did not continue to roll up his paintings?
No. It was only to roll them, to bring them back.
Okay.
It was only to bring them back. Now, one night, as a conservator, one very nice thing is that his technical skills were excellent. He would have his canvas lined with lead adhesive to masonite before he painted. Lead adhesive is very strong and very stable with environmental changes. Masonite will degrade with time, but the canvas was undoubtedly linen, and it's just solidly attached, as is the case here and the case here. And Anna Bloch, his second wife, was an assistant at some point, and she would help do this. Then his paints were very well mixed and good solid oil paints, and his technique is just excellent. So, there's no complaints about that. Now, Ben, on the other hand, did tempera and then put oil on top and wouldn't mix the tempera right, and he's a conservator's nightmare. And we have all kinds of work to do with his work. And they would flake in his lifetime. He'd scrape the flakes off and then repaint it, and then that would, We're putting together another Benton show that you may or may not know about. And it's going to be here in next fall. 15, wow, yeah. So stay tuned for that, it'll be a great show. And from that point of view, we went down, Mayor Schaefer's the conservator for the show, my associate. She went down to Branson area to look at a painting that was at a college, wonderful painting. And oh my gosh, the whole sky is blistered. And it probably relates to him scraping tempera off and putting oil on and maybe moisture, I don't know. But there's not really a solution to that problem. We can't have the painting in the show because it can't travel. Whereas Bloch's paintings, once we've taken care of those that were rolled up, are all good to go.
Wouldn't you run a risk though in rolling the paintings that the oil paint would not be totally dry, because it takes a long time for it. Wasn't there any sticking?
I think there were a couple of signs of that, small signs of it, but the problem is he rolled them, you don't know how to do it. He rolled them face in. You don't roll them face in, you roll them face out. And some of them were thinly painted enough that really didn't cause a problem. But that self-portrait that was thickly painted and was on top of another painting, it just cracked and it cupped. It was just ridges of cups. And other paintings, well, not this one, but had other issues. And in conservation, we always do a full examination first, good photographs. So I have photographs of all these paintings before I started restoring them. I'm very pleased that 25 years later, the self-portrait is still doing what it's supposed to do, laying down flat, and it hasn't changed a bit.
Where is the self-portrait?
Pardon?
Where is the self-portrait?
It's owned by the foundation. It's still owned by the foundation, yeah.
So was he prolific after he came to Kansas? Did he do a lot of work?
He did a lot of work, but he would spend a fair amount of time on a painting. Now in the German, as he's a young man just learning, he would paint big paintings pretty quickly. In America, of course, he's teaching and he's got kids, he's got a lot of things going on, but there's a lot of little brushwork here, and he would sit back and look at it and work on it. But there's still a lot of paintings. So he was very prolific all the way through his career, and in 1959, I guess that was, he realized that his last painting is a great painting, and it's in the catalog downstairs. You should look at it. And then I guess he said he can't paint now. He did spectacular watercolors, only in the American period, because he started in Germany. He was a draftsman, made drawings, and they're great drawings, but he had never done any watercolors. So his earliest watercolors are a nice pen drawing, and then he kind of colors it with color. And I love watching an artist learn. So the use of watercolor in Germany is just very timid, very immature, and incapable. Then in the 20s, he's playing around with watercolor more. Then, the late 20s and 30s hit, and my God, the guy's a master. 40s, 50s, his watercolors are astonishing. His drawings were just good all the way through. And that's why, if you have an interest in Bloch, you just thumb through the catalog downstairs from our 1997 show. And there's a companion book to it as well that scholars at KU put together, and that's also available down in the bookstore here. Yeah. Now, if people know of Bloch, does anyone especially followed his career? Is a name you might not know about or might know about?
I saw the 1997 exhibit here, so that's why I was
Good.
interested tonight.
Great. It seems like not that long ago, but that really was a while ago.
I didn't know it was that one record.
I know. Well, good. I'll be around if you have any other questions as well.
When you were examining that first canvas, the three prior,
Right, Perot's, yeah.
could you tell what he had painted over?
I couldn't, and I think I did an X-ray of that, and I still couldn't figure out what the painting was underneath it. I did do an X-ray of that, but you could see, and you can go in and look at the brushstrokes that don't have anything to do with these figures. They're just going in a different direction. And
No, they
that tells you.
But he didn't like what he had done so much to just paint over it.
Well, beyond that, he also would destroy paintings that he didn't like.
Really?
And he kept a record book that we have recently, Frank Barron, a scholar at KU, has put together a book where they photographed all of the pictures in his record book from the German period. And it's amazing how many wonderful paintings he destroyed because he didn't think they were good enough. When you see a picture, you go, oh my God, I love that painting. And he noted himself destroyed. Yeah.
Was any of his work categorized as degenerate art by the Third Reich? Was any of it destroyed?
I don't know the answer to that. It would have been considered degenerate art if it was in a collection over there, I'm sure.
But did he bring it all over here?
Well, he sold stuff too.
So there were,
there would have been, there'd be in private collections, and maybe they were taken from those collections as degenerate art. So if the Nazis were looking at it, they would have definitely considered it degenerate art. They had a real problem with Franz Marc because it was, by their definition, degenerate art. But he was a hero from World War I because he died in the war. And I'm not a scholar in that area. I can't answer questions about that, but I know that the poor Nazis were conflicted with that. Bless their heart. I know, right?
What is the title of this work? I didn't hear you say it.
It's composition red and blue.
Okay.
So it's just
Whistler?
something like that. But it's really a wonderful thing, and it's on his original canvas mounted to masonite.
So you're going to take this and put it back in storage after tonight?
We are.
Oh.
these are
Did you want to take it home?
And then what was the one that was down in these brushes, or it was blue and purple? What was that?
That was an oil. That was on.
Oh, it was just on loan?
Yeah.
Okay. And do you remember who owns that?
I don't. It was anonymous.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. That was beautiful.
Yes.
As well, all the layers.
And that's was owned by the same owners that we. at one point, but not
Oh,
now.
but yeah, I love that.
I might point out that the Green Domino is going to be in a show that we have that opens in January. Jane Shaw is World War I, about modernism, sort of the growth of modernism through the war, and then the effect of the war on modernism afterwards. So it's sort of three segments of modernism, and the Green Domino is going to be in that show.
Where will that be?
Opens January, it's up until
Oh, here.
Yeah, here. Yeah.
I think it's incredible that he only started studying painting in 1909, and you see the very gray, the three corals is very gray and muddy
Yeah.
to me. And then all of a sudden in 1913, then you've got the Green Domino. And it's just phenomenal.
It's amazing. You know, he's got a family and he's not earning much money, and you know he's living in Germany. It's before the war. He was hitting it, really hitting it. But when you look at his drawings, even in St. Louis, I mean, you could see he was a very capable artist. I mean, his drawings are just amazing.
What had his education been before starting the job at the newspaper?
He studied art a little bit. I'm not going to remember. Not advanced formal
Right,
training.
okay.
He just loved it, and
And obviously had enough skill that his patron
right.
knew.
You know, and then the owner of the Mirror, that literary periodical, put him to the task, and he just, you know, did the caricatures wonderfully. And, you know, there are pictures of those things in the cabinet downstairs.
So the foundation purpose is,
Well, with any artist, the foundation is to carry on the artist's name, support activities. Like the foundation lent quite a number of pieces to the Spencer Show.
Yeah.
And we're working with